in her world, she is just this, she is a goddess. And she truly believes that. It was so amazing to watch it in the psychological version of how we have to cope and what we have to do. And she had two dead ends, and she had to go away. And I just thought that that was like an extreme example, like I usually give, of things that, of being able to look at those things and those coping mechanisms that we use to get through life, and how somebody maybe with a little bit of a dirtier mind than we had.
She got some serious fun up in that end.
Welcome to the Dirty Mind Podcast.
That's dirty. That's dirty.
Okay, I wanted to and then the only thing that I really needed to discuss was this thing that I wanted to talk to you about with the Lori Vallow
Tell
case
me.
that is going on now. Okay.
I'm horrified.
So-
I know in the States, this is a big
know.
thing. People are listening, watching the trial. You tell me about it. I stay out of it because I just can't. It's one of those things like,
I know. Honestly, I've been trying to process myself because I know how you are. And I, as a really sensitive girl and just a person who's very affected by things, I cannot understand why I go straight into the dark and want to understand all of this stuff. So I follow it all. Now, you also have to understand that this happened right near me.
Yeah.
So I am in the area where this was occurring. Okay. So if anybody has followed this trial right now, especially here in the United States, this woman was part of the LDS church, right? So she was Mormon. Lori Vallow is innocent until proven guilty. And I am not diagnosing. I am not saying exactly what happened. I was not there, thankfully. And I am giving from what I hear or what I have heard explained to me psychologically, or what I have gathered with my own research and education on these topics, but absolutely in no way for any of these groups. Especially, I think right now it's a hot topic, this whole thing, because this is a really big population for LDS, right? And I am friends with many of them, and I am often I work for somebody who is in the church. I have lots of my kids' friends and their parents, and lovely people. So this is hard because what happened is this was a fringe group. These are not the teachings of that church, right? So people can have their own beef with whatever they want to say about that group and that she grew up with in this group. However, this was a fringe group they splintered off and, did their own thing. And most of them who were in it, is a very small group, really didn't understand what was actually happening, and they didn't understand the conditioning, and they are aware now and they are testifying, but a lot of them have blood on their hands. I mean, they really do. It's really sad because any of us could have been in a situation where, we are conditioned or indoctrinated in some way, and that we believe something and we don't realize that if something really dangerous and illegal and wrong is happening, we can feel like we were part of that. And they, previously through her life had, was a mother. She had some things, I mean, like everybody does, because you are not just your religion, right? You are who you are. So there's some talk from her family that she could be very vicious. She's been married, 5 times now. I mean, there were some things that you could see, but apparently she was extremely outgoing, very good mother, apparently, like really was very invested. Anyway, she meets this guy in this, part of this little fringe break-off group. And he is, honestly, he's a dork. He was a dork, and he went on a complete like Jesus Christ complex where he had these near-death experiences, which if you actually which I have heard some of him speaking about that, it's because he saw other people making a lot of, not just money, but getting a lot of attention on having near-death experiences and having those kinds of things happen. So he talks about these multiple things that have happened that they were near death. One of them was getting hit by a wave. Okay. He got like a stitch or something. And so it's kind of, annoying because people who actually grew up in like California where he was at the time were like, okay, so you grew up in Utah and you got hit with a wave, because the waves can be big. I wouldn't classify that as a near-death experience, but anyway, this guy somehow got, people, just this small group, and these two were like the worst combination, because the perfect storm, because he needed the attention, and he had a wife and all these children, and she was on her fourth husband and had all these kids, but then she's gorgeous, and he wanted the pretty girl, and then so it became like they were past lives together, and then it became they call each other James and Elena, and it became that they were together in all these other lives. So now they're like here to usher in the 144,000 for the second coming. And they really pulled people in, and they got them to be in this group, and they would do these castings where they started saying that people were becoming like a zombie has entered, her husband. Oh, ironically, a demon or a zombie now is in her husband. So it's not him anymore. So she has her brother shoot him and then claimed it's self-defense, and everything was shady. And I can't even tell you what goes on this tailspin all the way to the point where she had both of her children. She has an older son who was already out of the house, but both of her children, one who was 16, her daughter, and one who was 7, who was on the spectrum. And she had them both, they were both murdered, and said that they were zombies. I mean, the evidence is insane. But when I tell you, and I'm not going to get into it because I don't want to affect you too much, but on the second day or first day, I think first or second day of this trial, they went through the entire morning of showing and having witnesses on the stand where they were showing exactly how they found these kids and what they found. Okay. So we're talking horrific situations, understanding that these kids were, there's evidence that the kids were fighting right against it, that you would hope that the little one who was bound up was drugged or something, but if there's bruises on their arms, that they were fighting. It's just, it was so horrific. They were showing apparently in court all these, the remains and the bones and the way that they found them, and they were showing the face. Okay. So after that morning, this woman she's not right. Like, she really has broken off. Like, she is gone. So she'll laugh or snicker. Like, people just don't understand that she is so evolved, and that she is so, they don't get who she is or whatever it is. This time she asked her lawyers, she was crying in the back, and they had this whole thing, and her lawyers asked her to ask the court and ask the judge if she could leave, because she was emotionally distraught halfway through the day, because she didn't want to have to sit and see the remains of her children. Right. So here's what happened. I was listening to the information that I got was from this podcast called Hidden True Crime, which I'm sure a lot of people have listened in on if they follow this case. And it's a girl named Lauren and her husband, Dr. John, and he is a forensic psychologist, and he's so wise. And I really love the way that he explained the situation that happened. So because we're talking about dirty minds and we're talking about mental health, what happens is that it looks like most likely that she has some kind of a personality disorder, right? So she's got either whatever narcissistic personality, borderline, histrionic. And so she's already having trouble functioning and grasping the truth, because she can't see anything other than her own victimization. Do you know what I mean? Like, the kids were too hard, or they were possessed, and what is she supposed to do? Right? She can't see past these things. But what happened in this, it was a clear moment where all of us go through, which is like fight, flight, or freeze, right? So she is used to being combative. If people went up against her before she was arrested, if anybody went up against her and her beliefs or anything like that, she's going to fight you on it. She gets aggressive. She would intimidate people. There's a lot of snarkiness in her. She did not, she really went after people. So she would put up that fight. She can't put up the fight in this situation. You cannot fight in front of the jury. You can't yell out to the judge, right? So she has no fight response, okay? She tried to leave. She tried to get out of the thing, because that would be her flight, right? She tried to leave and get out of, she wants the jury, who is going to be forever traumatized, because they have to look at these things and understand what evidence was shown, every rock, every grave that they made, every pet cemetery that they put these children in, and pretended that they were just gone for months and months. They just were living this life, running off and getting married in Hawaii, like insane, buying wedding rings before like things were even happening. She's spending all the money of these kids who were getting Social Security and getting, you know, whatever it was. So she doesn't think that she should have to do it because she's emotionally distressed. She shouldn't have to see what her handiwork was. So she tries to leave. The judge says, no, you have to stay. Okay. So we knocked out fight. She can't do that. We knocked out flight. She can't do that. So what happened was, and a lot of people were commenting on this, and I wanted to bring this up because what she did was people were all over Twitter, everywhere afterwards. Oh my gosh, she fell asleep. She fell asleep for like a half hour in the second half of the day. Well, what she actually did was, yes, whether she was sleeping for real or not, we don't know, but she went into a dissociated place. So where she could just escape. So she froze and went there. Her mental health is not able to, with this kind of a personality disorder, is not able to comprehend the actual reality of what has happened. And because I really do believe that if she wouldn't be able to, she has to be in this delusion and she has to stay in this delusion, which we see a lot of people who have these kinds of issues and narcissism, that they cannot, it's always about them and that there's always another way. But here it is that there is no other perspective. I mean, the evidence is right there. I mean, this girl thought that the second coming was coming, so she really didn't think we get to this place, right? She had a date where she thought that it's all over, so it doesn't matter what she does with these kids. It doesn't matter. Here she is this many years later, and it has been years, like over 3 years, because she was not mentally competent to stand trial a couple years ago. I think she probably was floating in and out of complete psychosis and breaking down. If your mind actually, you're sitting in let's just say you're sitting in a prison. If you're sitting in a prison and you realize, and you just have one moment where you realize that this is horrible and the plan didn't work out at all, and Jesus, you thought, told you that you were meant to go and burn it out of their body and burn that zombie out, or to, you know, you have to do this, and they're trying to get other people to understand what needs to happen. And then all of a sudden, these years later, you are not with Jesus in the second coming and you are sitting in a prison cell. She must have had moments where she came to a little bit, but then that thought or that understanding was so big that she would go back into some kind of psychosis. So she was not well enough actually to comprehend it. And I found it so interesting because she has this kind of, you know, classic personality disorder and whatever else. You know, I can't diagnose her or know for sure what is exactly going on, so I'm not doing that. But it was really interesting for me to watch the tactics of what someone has to go through to be able to sit through court and be able to, you know, she's found mentally competent now. She still has that snarkiness. There's only been a few times where she showed any emotion. And that first day was that moment was, that morning was really, I don't think that she was smiling like she usually does. She's like, will literally smile and like be put in the, you know, police car afterwards and like be smiling to people like it's a beauty pageant. Like, or she's turning around to the lawyers, like attorneys found, there's nobody in the courtroom for her. Like she literally has legitimately, no one is there for her family, nobody. But she still will turn around to like the attorney's, you know, family that's sitting there, or someone that's there, and just like, hi, mouth the word hi, like this is some kind of show, or that they can see her in the way because she sees herself in this way. So we know delusion. I just felt like it was so perfect to discuss this because not only is this really a big deal right now and what's going on, especially in where I live, but it also is so interesting just to watch what we will do with our mind when we can't, you know, fight or flight. And then she goes into the second half of the day. She's all dead ends. So she puts herself in this comatose state. So she does not have to, like, where she's completely just dissociated from it and either fell asleep, which does happen. I've seen it happen many times with people who couldn't face the information and will just check out and fall asleep. I And I just thought that that was like an extreme example, like I usually give, of things that, you know, of being able to look at those things and those coping mechanisms that we use to get through life, and how somebody maybe with a little bit of a dirtier mind than we have, I would say that she's like she's got some mud up in that head, and
She's got some serious mud up in that head.
she's got some mud up in that head, girl. And I found that to be really interesting. And I found it interesting because people were so repulsed, which I do understand, and they could not even believe it, the audacity, because she's got a lot of like, she has guts. I mean, this girl is, she's got the guts to go out and say the dumbest thing, or smile, or like, or just make a smirk when someone's saying something that, you know, because she, in her world, she is just this, she is a goddess. And she truly believes that in most of her moments. So it just was interesting to me that people were so shocked, and the jury's looking at this, and she's just right there. And I knew, and listening to this guy who explained it so beautifully, it was so amazing to watch it in the psychological version of how we have to cope and what we have to do. And she had two dead ends, and she had to go away. And it's just watching, it's like a psychology, you know, this should be for people who are going into forensic psychology, people who are going into these kinds of professions should really be studying cases like this, because it is pretty interesting to watch someone's reaction when their mind was already dirty, but then watching, you know, their ways of having to cope and what we do with that. It's pretty interesting. So I can't even imagine the people who are coming in as witnesses, and they're being forced to speak because that's their immunity, right? And they have some kind of a deal to say what happened. It is humiliating for them to have to say what they believed, to have their text messages written, to say that they saw these visions of like what they were told they saw and what their superpower was. One of the women was like the goddess of earth, and she was in control of all of the elements. So she was like, you know, if we have a tornado, she's the one starting it. And it's embarrassing. It's humiliating for her to have to admit that, because she understands now what her part was. And you and I can do this on a smaller scale. And actually, to be honest with you, we just had conversations, and we were reading an article on something that, you know, happened with a person who was in the same group as us. I did not know him, right? It was a lot later after I was gone, and you did. And
he ended up killing his 9-year-old son and then himself, in part based on the belief that the vaccines were so dangerous. Like they had the kid's mom wanted to vaccinate the kid, and they had basically agreed to do that the next day, and then he killed them both
the night before.
So,
Right, on the night before, and himself. And part of us being in that group, you can see, I mean, when I was in this group, we were not discussing vaccines at that time, because we were not in COVID territory at that time. There was no conversation about that. But the information that he got from this group and the leader of the group contributed to whatever mental health, you know, dynamics were going on for him. And however his mind was dirtied, it was further confirmed and dirtied up a lot more by, you know, people saying things about what will happen to people if they're vaccinated, or, you know, and making it a wrong or bad thing. So,
we weren't talking
yeah.
about vaccines, but at the time you were in, what they were talking about, you can see how it lends itself that way, because they were telling us things like DNA isn't real. Like DNA is something that it's a different thing. It's these like Mobius strips that are twisted together. So because in the us versus them, we don't have DNA, but we have this thing that looks like DNA, but we're special. And so it's actually not, so science doesn't apply, basically. So it's like anything's changeable. So it's this mystical thinking where, so it lays this foundation for their teachings and their doctrine and their magical powers that they teach you to have with hands-on healing and things like that, to take the place of things like medical science and medicine and interventions like chemotherapy, radiation, or things that you would do when you find out that you have a disease or something. So instead of that, because you don't have DNA and your body is completely different and magical, you don't need to do the traditional thing that you would have to do if you were human. And
Yes.
so we were being like, the foundation was laid there for
Mhm.
you know, something like this where you have a pandemic and it's like, of course you don't need a vaccine because you're not human. Like the humans need
Right.
vaccines.
Okay. And I just want to say that in this, what you're talking about, okay? How many red flags did you just say in there? It's like, okay, so we are not human. The humans are an us versus them, right? We're an us versus them because we were humanoids, right? So you only need salt, sugar, and energy and
Water,
I don't know, water. Okay. And
alcohol.
also and alcohol, right? That's the other food group. And them knowing more than we know. Like, okay, so like just I am a smart girl and you are too. And both of us are educated, both of us are logical. Why? Like, why would we accept that a person who's an ex real estate agent, an ex Scientologist, is the person who knows more than the scientist, right? Who's been studying DNA and these it's like, no, they've never come across a person that's like, wait, we call this a humanoid. They don't actually even have DNA. So it's like, why? Like, why would we give that kind of a benefit? You know what I mean? Give them the benefit of the doubt. Like where was that coming from that we would believe that kind of nonsense? And again, that's like a love bombing. Because it's saying you are part of this. Nobody wants to be the other humans who have the actual DNA. We want the special magic Harry Potter stuff. And like, that's what we're here for. But it just amazes me how we would just be vulnerable enough to believe that and not think, you know, that you actually don't have any idea what you're talking about. And you're not providing any scientific evidence that this is a reality. So how do you explain that to anybody? How do you, and why is it that just this little group in the United States, like, or and you guys are, they have some little pockets in all of the countries, right? You're in Australia, they have a base there and some other places, but still like, okay, really? And that's what they're the ones just running around finding each other without DNA. And we just took that without any kind of thought.
These were not questions we were asking. Like, why did you get chosen to have this information?
Or
Where did it come from?
honestly, I think that maybe if I can remember correctly, and this might be true for you too, it might be that I didn't believe it, or I didn't know if I did, or I didn't kind of say anything. And I just would kind of let it go for a minute. But then when you spend enough time, once again, like I said earlier, is that if you spend enough time, you've spent 5 days or you spent whatever, your brain really can flip into another state where, and it does. I mean, it's like we're sitting there doing body work on each other, on each other's heads. There was a hypnotic process that goes along with this so that you do start to believe things like we don't have DNA and this is what's going to happen, this is how your body's made up because we know. And then you just actually will absorb it and allow it in as truth.
Back to the 4 Fs for a second, because you were talking about Lori Vallow in court. Like, she couldn't fight, she couldn't flee, she froze and fell asleep or dissociated.
Yes.
The other one is fawning.
Yes.
Which, tell me, so did she have a fawn response with that guy? Like, was that?
So you explain what fawning is.
Okay,
explain what fawning is and give an explanation for that.
So an extreme example would be Stockholm syndrome, where you have been in a
hostage situation. Yes.
And
yes.
So initially, obviously, you're scared of the attacker or your perpetrator or the kidnapper or the person that is holding you hostage, and you have the hostage. So initially, obviously, you're scared and all of those things. So one thing that can happen, which is a trauma response, is this fawning or this Stockholm syndrome, where you actually, in an attempt to stay safe, have to align yourself with the bad guy and even fall in love with that person, or at least start to believe that they have your best interest at heart, and you will do things like help them, keep the police away, or you turn against people that are trying to free you and things like that. And even when they found people that have been taken away, and it's like, or in a domestic violence or things like that, and the police come, and it's like they will deny that anything wrong is happening, and they will say, no, I'm completely in love with this person and I'm totally safe, or whatever. This is a fawning response, which is one of those 4 F's. And this, actually, what I'm learning now, can go on for years. It's not just a day of fawning. It's like, so when I was in this group, I would do things like, we were in these classes and the guy that would hurl abuse at you, right, the leader, would be doing whatever, and you would get up to the microphone and you would like actually basically ask for the verbal assault, like this abuse. And then I would like ask for it and then be grateful for it, and he'd go up and hug him afterwards.
I know.
So gross.
Or another thing that you said, that just to piggyback off that you also said, you mentioned before when we had this discussion, was that it was like a sense of pride because look how much you could handle. And it's like you're asking them you can show them how much abuse you can take, not understanding that it's abuse at the time.
No.
But putting yourself in a situation where you are almost catatonic, right? Afterwards, right?
And
because
that
you are
is the dissociation.
Yes.
So that's what really I started to recognize later. Now they framed this as you were fried. They would call it being fried, where you couldn't think and you couldn't react, and you actually couldn't sometimes even talk, or like you just like catatonic. And I would have to be
right, which fried would also, for people, just to have another word, it's also called traumatized.
Yeah, well, we didn't call it that.
Right. I know they didn't conveniently, they didn't use that word. They weren't like, actually what we're doing is traumatizing you. And that response that you're talking about, not being able to speak or being catatonic or being dissociated, is trauma.
And sometimes they would frame it that you had trauma leaving your body, because people would shake, or there would be like outbursts, and because they would do these like laying on of hands, walking around the room things, and people would have these like releases of trauma where they were actually being traumatized. And so they would spin that as like, you've had trauma, and so it's leaving your body, which maybe you did have trauma too in the past, but you're actually in a situation here that's not safe. You're in a group where you're being publicly humiliated, shamed, your worst things you've ever done, or even things you haven't done, you're being told that you did, are being put on you publicly, and you're supposed to, the right way to be in that situation is you're not allowed to fight. You're not allowed to flee.
You're not allowed to fight. Yep.
Because you would be called reactive. You're supposed to be what they would call vulnerable, which means you just take it. You take it.
And you have to, if you do, there's a part freeze, but there's a part fawn in it, that because there's a lot of that fawn in it, that is, they're doing this for my best, it's in my best interest. They're doing this because they care about me, and I need to break this habit that I do, or I need to be better, or whatever that is, right?
Yeah. And so in the receiving of the abuse and the not fighting, which would be your natural reaction, would be to say stop or run away. So you're not allowed to do that. You're actually being traumatized. And so what I would do is then like dissociate and fawn. So, and it's actually a smart thing that our brain does, and it keeps us safe because that is the right response in that situation that keeps you from being hurt.
Right. But then you're conditioned to go back for more. So you go do the same thing again. And I think about that a lot, because being in that group, I think a lot about, afterwards you do go back and ponder a lot of situations, and I feel even I can get shaky just thinking about how I was laying there and I would let my body be in this like hypnotic state. So somebody's doing like body work on you, you are in a hypnotic state and they're feeding these things to you and saying things. It might not even be just to you. There were plenty of things that were just to me, but there were also plenty of things that were just said that is, I'm just a completely, the trauma of just even remembering being that vulnerable and opening up my body and my mind to be like, here you go. You can mold it like clay. I'm giving this to you. And then after you have this, fight, flight, response, freeze, fawn, we're going back and doing it again. The other very convenient thing for them is to make this so that you are not human. So if you are a humanoid, isn't it convenient? Then all the psychological practices can't work on you either. You can't study psychology because not only can you can't do any thought, feeling, emotion. So you can't critically think like we previously spoke about. You can't use your intuition and your body telling you, get out of here, your gut telling you, get out of here. And you're just open and you are allowing it to move through. You can't learn and say, actually, this feels like I'm having a traumatic response or I'm having a fight, or I can't fight or flight. It's like we're dissecting this now. And I just, alls I can hope is that someone hears this before they ever go to the initial process of any of these groups, any of these places, any of these people, any of these relationships, whatever it is, and really understands beforehand that a traumatic response and being able to handle the biggest trauma is not a pride thing. It's not something we should be proud about. It is damaging, right? And that these are the things we need to think about. And I will say, if you want to put that fawning with the Lori Vallow case, and if you're asking for my opinion, which is only my opinion, and I have studied and read and listened to everything, because once I go in, I have to go in like full force. So I've got all the knowledge of this case and I've heard all the things and all the recordings and all the stuff that's going on for years that they've had. I'm sure she was having some kind of a response, but I will tell you that she is as much of the leader as he was. And they were, when I say that they were a perfect storm, they were a perfect storm. She was calling the shots a lot. And they were talking about it, they were, yes, he was the one who really, that she would say, like, I just need to check with him and chat and see if he, if I, like, we did this, like she does this meditation with people and they're casting out, zombies out of people. But what she's really doing with those people that are there with her, casting this zombie out, is conditioning them that when he dies, it was like, because the zombie finally left and they did it. But anyway, basically it would be, an extreme example would be Patty Hearst. Okay. So being kidnapped and then 19 months later, she is with them doing, as a fugitive, and she's wanted for, bank robberies. She's for serious crimes. Right. But she was in a fawn response.
Wasn't she the one that
Yes.
did the Stockholm syndrome?
She's Stockholm syndrome.
Yeah.
She was a victim, a kidnapping victim, and then maybe couldn't handle that and had to join that group. Kind of a new part of the fight, flight, or freeze, right? That a lot of people don't know, the fawning, the fourth F. And there's been some podcasting lately that people have been explaining that a little bit better. And I think that you're right in the Lori Vallow case. I do believe that I don't believe she was in a fawn response. There was this very strong, it's not even strong, so I shouldn't use that word, but it was a very aggressive, assertive side of her that wants what she wants, when she wants it. And she wants to be as special as she was being made out to be. And this guy, the perfect storm, because Chad Daybell is a dork. And I'm not kidding. I mean, he's not good to look at. He's not good. He talks in a just really not a charismatic way. It's really hard to find where he, understand how his narcissism comes across as enticing. But whatever she was lacking and that she needed, and whatever he was lacking and he needed, they fit each other. Like both of their desires just went like a moth to a flame, like this magnetic pull to each other. and they went off the deep end. It is devastating. It's a massive, massive tragedy all around for every single person involved and everyone who had to sit there and watch. But I just thought it was interesting, and it was a good time to talk about that very clear
Very
example in a courtroom
extreme.
of fight, flight,
Yeah.
freeze, and the fawning of everybody else around them from not even being able to handle the trauma that was caused and what actually went down.
Yeah. Amazing.